Good morning. We're going to be taking a little break from our series Unstoppable and looking at John 2, 1 through 11 this morning. The passage reads this. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour is not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. I want to start off with a game where I show you a few pictures of signs and logos, and you tell me what they represent. The first one's pretty easy. Of course, most of you know that this is the Nike logo. I mean, you'd have to be living under a rock not to know that that's the case. Here's another one. What do you think? Instagram. Yes. Okay, we're going to get a little more challenging. What's this one? If I could actually turn the page on this one. You know? Low flying zone warning. Very strange, but that's what it means. How about another one? If you don't get this one, I mean, come on. Easiest one, Mickey D's. Okay, last one. I don't think that this one's that easy. What do you think? Look familiar? Children at play. You know, signs are symbols. They're meant to point to something greater than themselves. Take, for example, when you go on a road trip. And as you travel on the road, you look for different signs to tell you where you are. There are mile markers, which tell you how far you've gone and how far you still need to go. Signs that let you know when you're reaching an upcoming exit. Welcoming signs as you enter a new state, or that tell you when you've left a state. Or rest stop signs that my kids beg me to follow on a long road trip. I'm sure you can sympathize if you're a parent out there. Signs are meant to show you the way to what you're looking for, or give you a picture of what to expect. And the key to understanding the passage we just read is when verse 11 says, "What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory." John could have called it a miracle, but he called it a sign, because the miracle itself is not as important as what it points to. See, there have been other men, prophets like Moses and Elijah, who God would use to do mighty things, like turning a staff into a serpent, or water into blood, praying for fire to come down from heaven, or raising even the dead back to life. Jaw-dropping things that you'd have to see to believe. But when Jesus did miracles, it was to reveal something about himself. Verse 11 says the sign was to reveal his glory, meaning his greatness, how he's set apart from anyone or anything we've ever seen. John 1 says this about Jesus, when it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. Hebrews 1:3 echoes this by saying, "The Son is the radiance of God's glory, the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word." After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of majesty in heaven. In other words, When you look at Jesus, you see God. If you spend some time around my son, Aaron, you learn right away he's a goofball. He loves being around people. If something's going on, he wants to be a part of the action. And he's super, 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 super competitive. If you were to be playing a pickup basketball game, for example, this little 4'0" kid would be convinced that he could take you. He'd be saying stuff like, "Bring it on! You want some of me?" He just loves having fun. Now, indirectly, as you get to know him, you're learning a little bit about his parents, who are slightly competitive too, and he can't help but be like us. But Jesus isn't simply like God. He has the very same nature and authority of God. Now, he's his own person, but they're made of the same stuff. Though he became a man, he's still fully God. And every miracle he does reveals who he is and what Christianity is all about. It's a sign, a picture, a sermon in action. So what does this story tell us about Jesus? And why does it matter? I mean, what difference is it going to make in my life 2,000 years later? Well, if Jesus is God, then he could do anything, including changing your life and mine. Though this is the beginning of Jesus' ministry, and he's in a small town called Cana. That's not too far from his hometown, Nazareth, for the wedding of a family friend or relative. And a wedding back then was the most important event of a person's life. You know, just a week ago, Holly and I celebrated 16 years of marriage. Crazy to think. And we're looking back at pictures of the wedding with our boys, and instantly you can't help but notice. What do you notice, first of all? You look so different. We're like babies excited to start life together. And you see how beautiful the church was and the decorations, and it was a day like no other that we'd ever have. See, when we think of wedding today, we think of an event where people splurge in a way they never will ever again. Ben Affleck and J-Lo had 2 weddings last year, if you remember. One of which was in Georgia, where they made their own personal island. This is crazy talk here, for guests to enjoy for several days, costing upwards of $400,000. See, when we think of weddings today, we think of a moment or event. But weddings back then were very different. Instead of having a ceremony at the church, the groom and his buddies would walk to the bride's house at night. And as they're going, a procession of people would be carrying torches to light the way. Getting the bride, they'd then turn back to the groom's parents' house, which became their new home. You got to realize couples back then were only teenagers when they got married, so it was common for them to live with the groom's parents. And as they're walking from house to house, people would give speeches expressing their love for the couple and blessing over their marriage. A legal contract would be put together at his parents' house to confirm their marriage. And then they would celebrate by partying for a week long. And you got to understand, weddings back then were the social event. Everyone who's remotely connected to you is coming. Not just your family and friends, but the mailman, the baker, your best friend's third cousin twice removed. Anyone who could get in there is coming. In a village community, that's just the way it is. It's like the town shut down for a week, and there'd be music with lots of food and wine nonstop, and the groom would have to pay for it all. Now, we could assume this couple from this small town probably didn't have much money. So the groom's family poured the little bit they had into this party, hoping it would be enough. But it wasn't. Nowadays, if you have a cookout and you run out of something, you could just drive to the store. You might be a little embarrassed, but it's not that big of a deal. But back then, when you ran out of something, there's nowhere to turn. There's no convenience store to go to. You can't call an Uber or a DoorDash. And in a shame and honor culture where there's unwritten rules and standards you have to live up to be good enough, hospitality was everything. So there's nothing more disgraceful than to invite people over to your house and run out of wine. In fact, people would have felt so entitled to be satisfied by what you have to offer that if they weren't, especially in a banquet setting, at minimum, you'd be the talk of the town. You know that awkward feeling when you walk into a room and it gets really quiet because you know they're talking about you. People would have found subtle ways to keep pointing out, there's the family who ran out of wine. But at worst, guests at a banquet could sue you, and you could be legally responsible for not meeting their needs. See, if something wasn't done here, this would scar the family forever. So Mary turns to Jesus, which in itself is amazing because by doing that, she's saying, I don't know how, but only you can fix this. Mary didn't fully understand who Jesus was at this point, but she sees at least, she knew from the angel who spoke to her when she conceived that her son was special and that God would use him to do mighty things. Yet Jesus responds to her in a stunning way, saying, Woman, why do you involve me? That's not the way most of us would approach our mother, but it sounds much harsher than it really is. Woman here is another way of saying, ma'am. It's not so much disrespectful as it is formal. It's a strange way to speak to your mom. But Jesus is trying to subtly help her understand that there's a shift happening in their relationship, that who she is to him doesn't give her special privileges. In high school, I had a girlfriend who worked at Pizza Hut. And of course, I'm thinking once we started dating, I'm getting free food all the time. Now, that's not the only reason I started dating her, but it certainly was a bonus. You may laugh, but when you have friends working at your favorite store or restaurant, you immediately start expecting discounts. It's kind of an unwritten rule, right? And you know what starts to happen? You slowly find yourself over there a lot more than you used to be. See, when you have people in high places, you expect to get advantages that others wouldn't. That's just human nature. But Jesus is telling his mother that as much as he loves her, even she has to approach him the same way as everyone else. Later on in his ministry, as he became more popular, Jesus' mother and brothers think he's going crazy because of some of the things he's claiming about himself, and they try to come and take him away as he's teaching a crowd in a house. But when he's told by the people his family are outside looking for him, he says, "Who are my mother and my brother?" Then he looked at those seated around him and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers." He's saying, my spiritual family takes priority over my earthly family. And those who see me as I am rather than what they want me to be are the ones who can have a relationship with me. Jesus must be approached on his terms and his ways. And to Mary, and Mary, to her credit, with her faith as limited as it was, humbles herself and tells the servants to do whatever he tells you to do. Now, how often does life not end up the way we thought it would? It could be as simple as losing a soccer game when we felt prepared to win, or as devastating as losing someone we love. I know for many of you, I don't need to tell you that life is hard. Some of you have lived through some very difficult things. You've endured chronic illness or made it through toxic relationships. You've got challenging family dynamics. Some have parents who have done things to you that clings to you to this day, or who weren't there at all, and you lived in a broken home full of wounded people. When my parents split up when I was 6, my mom and I moved into my aunt's basement, where she raised me alone when I was younger and worked the second shift. And she'd have to work a lot of overtime to pay the bills. So I found myself anywhere I could get a meal at night and, staying at friends' houses or on the streets way too much. And as much as she would try to save up for us to move out of that basement, we'd always find ourselves right back. I can count how many times we didn't have money for birthday gifts or to celebrate Christmas. There was a year we only lived on food stamps. And my mom, who was a godly woman, would pray all the time. And like Mary, would put the situation we were facing in God's hands. It's almost as if she knew God's got this. He sees what we're going through. He's not ignoring us. And he knows what he's doing. But I got to tell you, I wasn't wired like that. I'd get so frustrated thinking, how can we keep praying so much and it seemed like nothing was changing? We're still struggling. And I go through a range of emotions from bitterness to apathy, wondering, is he even listening? Does he care? How much does my mom have to work for things to start turning around for us? And I know for many of you, you've prayed prayers for healing, restoration with loved ones who are distant, and provision for needs that have not been answered. And the only thing we can feel in those moments is God's silence. And we may think, if we're not doubting God, maybe we've done something wrong. Maybe we've made him upset, or there's hidden sin in our lives that he's even punishing us for. But sometimes there are circumstances in life that are beyond our control, that for some reason God in his sovereign wisdom would have us walk through and endure rather than deliver us from. And as we come to him, as the widow did daily until the wicked judge gave her justice, the difference is we have a gracious God in heaven who carries us when we're too weak to keep going, who never forsakes us. Even when our hearts are breaking, God is working for those who trust in him. The Israelites were told when they go astray, but if from there you seek the Lord your God, you will find him if you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. And the psalmist said, the Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. When you know the truth about God's character, that he's loving, kind, faithful, and good, even when our circumstances don't match those realities, and you just trust him to work in your situation however he pleases, folks, that's when you start to experience his very best for you, which we'll talk about a little more later. But see, as limited as Mary's faith was, she knew the heart of her son, and that made all the difference. While seeing 6 jars probably in the courtyard where the well was, Jesus has the servants fill them up with water. Now, these weren't your typical, little dinky jars. They were 20 to 30 gallons each, almost like a steel drum. Jewish law would require that they wash their hands before and after meals. So these jars were used for that and that alone. But once Jesus used them to change water into wine, it broke protocol. Because you can't use what's holy and set apart for God for what's not. And those jars could never be used again for cleansing. But something bigger is happening here. See, these jars represent the law. And the law was established to help people see that God is holy and we're not. His ways are perfect and we're flawed. It's like having a banged up old car next to a Tesla or being underdressed in a formal event. You can't help but notice imperfections next to glory. And so sacrifices and rituals were done to pay for their sins, but they never truly could. You'd always have to do it again and again and again. Hebrews, speaking of Jesus, says, first he said, sacrifices and offerings, burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not desire, nor were you pleased with them, though they were offered in accordance with the law. Then he said, here I am. I have come to do your will. He sets aside the first to establish the second. And by that will, we have been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Jesus uses this miracle to say that he has come to replace the law and do what it couldn't. When he tells Mary earlier that his hour has not come, he's talking about his death, something he mentions throughout his ministry repeatedly, because he didn't come on this earth primarily to live, but to die. He came to live the life of perfect obedience we couldn't, to die the death we should have. Because in our own strength, look, the wine always runs dry. We all sense we're not quite what we should be. No matter how hard we try to cover up, we struggle with the restlessness of guilt, knowing we will never be as good as we ought to be. See, even the most hardened person knows deep down inside something's missing. They just don't know what it is. So they try to mask it by looking for security apart from God. Instead of worshiping Him, they worship their looks or career or making a name for themselves and think once they get that, now they're truly living. The good life is a house with a white picket fence, an amazing spouse, and 2.5 children. But listen to me closely. As good as those things can be, and they are good, they can't satisfy your deepest longing, and they won't last. You were created with a God-shaped hole in your heart that if you try to fill with anything else, will slowly destroy you, because it will never be enough. It was never made to carry that load, and if you put that weight on your goals or the people you love, I gotta tell you, you'll crush them. There was a girl I met with years ago who was struggling with anxiety. She always felt like no one liked her, including her family and friends, which was strange because I knew the people in her life cared about her dearly, but she could never believe it. And she'd have these arguments with loved ones over this. She wanted to be loved, but her accusations that no one cared about her started pushing people away. I was preaching to a group of kids at Inspire Sport Camps about this a month ago, where our very own Margaret Yates works. And I said, the strongest idol you're facing in life right now is wanting to be liked by everyone. Your day can be determined by whether or not someone likes your Instagram post or comments on what you're wearing. And so much of the comparison has fueled anxiety and depression like I have never seen before in your generation. I mean, folks, you wouldn't believe how many people I talk to who are frustrated that their relationships and life altogether didn't turn out the way they thought it would. And they're angry. They feel cheated by life, but do you know what that often comes down to? They're worshiping the wrong thing. They thought that if they got this one thing, that life would be better, but they're still consumed by fear and anxiety because these things weren't created to satisfy you. They're temporary. But Jesus is offering peace and joy that goes beyond our circumstances. It's what my mom had years ago that I didn't understand. But to experience that, we need to be cleansed. We have a sin problem that pushes God away for these other pursuits. See, our identity is shaped by what we love and what we live for. Whatever gives us meaning and purpose, whatever keeps us up at night, and what we do anything to have. The problem is, that's naturally anything but God. And that's what sin is. But when we see that and confess, we've offended God in heaven. Like the tax collector at the temple who beat his chest and couldn't look up because his sins were so great. And with God's help, we turn away from our sin, trusting that by Jesus' death and resurrection, we can truly be saved. The Bible says once we do that, all our sins, not most, all are washed away, and we will become white as snow. In his book on being a Christian, Hans Kong wrote, "In these acts of love, Jesus created a scandal for devout religious Palestinian Jews. The absolutely unpardonable thing was not his concern for the sick, the cripples, the lepers, the possessed, nor even his partisanship for the poor, humble people. The real trouble was that he got involved with moral failures, with obviously irreligious and immoral people. People morally and politically suspect. So many dubious, obscure, abandoned, hopeless types existing as an irredical evil on the fringe of every society. This was the real scandal. Did he really have to go so far? What kind of naive and dangerous love is this, which does not know its limits? You know, the deepest longing in the human heart is to be loved and accepted. But we'll never experience that without forgiveness received through unconditional grace, where God gives us through Jesus what we couldn't earn and accepts us not on the basis of our goodness, but his love. He says, come to me, not after you get your act together, but just as you are, and I'll make you right. And that opens the door to his blessings. You see, wine was a symbol of joy. And when the master of the banquet says to the groom, this is the best wine yet, it points to how Jesus doesn't want you to just know about him. He wants you to experience him. Later on in Jesus' ministry, crowds of people flocked to him. They heard about his miracles and teachings, and they just had to see it for themselves. And for a while, they were blown away by his power and wisdom, but they ditched him when things got tough, showing that what they knew about him never went beneath the surface. Signs are meant to point to something greater than themselves. The difference between the disciples and everyone else who knew that Jesus turned this water into wine is that they believed in him, because the miracles revealed who he truly was. The end of John's gospel captures this when it says, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. On Father's Day, my family made me this huge 20-ounce T-bone steak. Now, I could see this thing was good. I mean, juice was running off this thing like crazy. I could smell it from a distance. But everything changed once I took that blessed bite and could taste just how good it was, because what I thought became true to my heart. The truth is, you can learn a lot about Jesus without ever truly knowing him. But the Bible says, taste and see that the Lord is good. It calls not to know, but to taste, because tasting is different than knowing. It's by tasting that you begin to truly know. Believing Jesus is God in my head has to sink down to my heart, where I start to hunger and long for him because I see his beauty and goodness. God wants us to take him in fully. Nothing less will do. And if you haven't, again, you could do that today by trusting in Jesus. But for those who have, you feel like God's been distant. The promise I hold on to, my favorite verse actually, Romans 5:8 says, and hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, who has been given to us. Whenever you start to doubt that God cares for you, remember the cross, and that through it you have access to the Father in prayer, where no problem is too big or too little for him. He cares about the details of our lives. And when you experience that through your relationship with him, and his love becomes real to you as you keep pursuing him through the ups and downs, you'll have the confidence to face anything, knowing he's with you no matter what. But you also need to realize in the midst of trials that a day is coming where Jesus is united with his people like a groom with his bride. And we'll have the greatest marriage feast, the best party there's ever been, where the food and the wine will never run out. The prophet Isaiah said, on this mountain the Lord Almighty will prepare a feast of rich food for all peoples, a banquet of aged wine, the best of meals, and the finest of wines. On this mountain he will destroy the shroud that enfolds all people, the sheet that covers all nations. He will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. The Lord has spoken. On that day, every sad thing will be undone. Suffering and death will be no more. And God will wipe away every tear as heaven comes down to us. C.S. Lewis once said that when we get discouraged by the things of this life, and it feels like nothing else in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that we were made for another world. You were made for another world. And you can have that promise through Jesus. John Newton, the man who wrote the hymn, Amazing Grace, before he got saved was a rough, foul-mouthed sailor who lived a rotten life. It was said that he hated life and life hated him. He was a captain of a slave ship, but he had a good mother who told him about the Savior when he was younger. He just ignored it, obviously. Then someone placed in his hands a copy of Thomas Kempis' book, The Imitation of Christ. Shortly after receiving this book, he was saved. He went all over England sharing his faith. When he preached as he got older, he'd have an assistant stand in the pulpit with him. He was nearly blind and spoke in whisper, but nothing kept him from preaching while he still had breath. Well, one Sunday while delivering his message, he repeated the sentence, "Jesus Christ is precious." His helper whispered to him, "But you've already said that twice." Newton turned to his helper and said loudly, "Yes, I've said it twice, and I'm going to say it again." And so the old preacher said again, "Jesus Christ is precious." When Jesus becomes precious to you, whether for the first time or once again, you see him for who he is, and everything changes. Father God, I do pray for those this morning who are hurting, no matter where they are, Lord. Whether they're in a place where maybe they're willing to accept the mercy and grace you're extending to them, I pray that you'd help them do that. Or they're in a place where they did long ago, but life happens and it's beating them up and they've lost sight of you, Lord, and they feel like you've lost sight of them. The promise we have is that you never, ever, ever, ever stop pursuing people. Lord, whether they know you or not, you run after the heart. And Lord, I do pray that they would receive your love today, that they would feel it, that they would know that there is a God in heaven who knows the number of hairs on their head and knows the details of their lives and wants to bring joy and fullness into their hearts and their homes, and they would allow him to. And I pray that they'd be open to this, Lord. And I pray that you'd meet them in a way that they experience your love and they taste it and they know for themselves you are good. Many things they've been taught, Lord, would become real to them. Pray this in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. Well, as always, it's a blessing. I pray that you have a great week and that God really meets you in the midst of all the ups and downs of life this week. God bless you. We'll see you next week as we continue Unstoppable.